Tonight, the temperature outside will drop, maybe 10 degrees, maybe 20. You will walk to your thermostat, press a button, and the cold will stop existing. You will not think about this. You will not feel grateful. You will just go back to whatever you were doing. But 60,000 years ago, your ancestors had no button, no thermostat, no insulated walls, no synthetic fiber, no heated blanket humming quietly beneath their weight. When the cold came, it came for them personally, and it brought everything it had. Here is what most people do not understand about ancient winters. They were not just cold. They were a different category of experience entirely. The last ice age, which peaked around 20,000 years ago, plunged global temperatures somewhere between 4 and 9 degrees Celsius below what we experience today. That sounds small until you understand what it actually looked like on the ground. Glaciers stretched across what is now Northern Europe, North America, and Asia. Woolly mammoths roamed open grasslands that no longer exist. Sea levels were so low that land bridges connected continents that are now separated by ocean. And your ancestors walked through all of it, barefoot in their earliest years, with nothing but each other and whatever their minds could invent. The question is not whether they survived. They did. You are here. The question is how, and the answer is far stranger, far more ingenious, and far more human than anything you have probably imagined. Start with fire. You have probably heard that ancient humans discovered fire around 400,000 years ago. What you have probably not heard is how radically that changed everything about what it meant to be cold. Richard Wrangham, a Harvard primatologist and the author of Catching Fire, argues that controlled fire use did not just keep ancient humans warm. It fundamentally rewired human social behavior. Fire extended the day. It created a focal point around which groups gathered after dark. It compressed social time into something intense and sustained in a way that daylight foraging never could. And during winter, when nights stretched long and cold, that fire circle became the gravitational center of human survival. But fire alone was not enough. You cannot carry a campfire with you. You cannot sleep inside the flame. So your ancestors had to solve a problem that no other animal had solved before. How do you hold warmth to your body when the air itself is trying to take it from you? The answer was clothing, and not just any clothing. Clothing so sophisticated that modern researchers have struggled to reconstruct it. Here is what archaeologists like Olga Soffer of the University of Illinois have found: evidence of woven textiles dating back at least 27,000 years. Not just crude animal hides thrown over a shoulder. Actual woven fibers interlaced with a precision that requires planning, tooling, and a conceptual leap that is extraordinary for any era. Needles carved from bone, some so fine they could thread a fiber you could barely see, have been excavated across Ice Age sites in Europe and Siberia. These needles are not blunt spikes. They are delicate. They are specific. They exist because someone understood that a tightly fitted garment traps air against the skin, and trapped air becomes insulation. And insulation is the difference between sleeping and not waking up. Think about what that means. 40,000 years ago, someone sat in the dark, holding a thin bone, pressing a sharp stone against it for hours, grinding a hole through its tip that was barely larger than a strand of sinew. Then they threaded that sinew through. Then they sewed pieces of hide together with a precision stitch that would hold against wind and movement and moisture. That person was solving a problem in real time with nothing but their hands and their mind. That person was, in every meaningful sense, an engineer. And they went further. Much further. Researchers excavating the Sunghir burial site in Russia, dated to roughly 34,000 years ago, discovered something remarkable. A man and 2 adolescents had been buried wearing clothing decorated with thousands of tiny ivory beads, each one individually carved. The beads were sewn in patterns that matched, suggesting not just decoration but a shared aesthetic, a shared idea of what it means to dress well. Paleontologist Ian Tattersall, who has spent decades studying these burial sites, argues that the deliberate ornamentation of cold-weather garments signals not just survival behavior but cultural identity. These were people who were not just trying to stay warm. They were deciding what warmth looked like, but shelter was the other half of the equation. And shelter is where ancient human ingenuity becomes almost incomprehensible. In regions where trees were sparse and temperatures dropped to -30 degrees Celsius, and below, your ancestors built structures out of the only large material available to them, mammoth bones. At sites like Mesirich in Ukraine, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of huts constructed from the interlocking bones and skulls of woolly mammoths covered with hides and insulated with earth. These were not temporary windbreaks. They were semi-permanent winter dwellings, some large enough to shelter multiple families, built in configurations that channeled airflow and concentrated heat from central hearths. Think about the logistics of that. A single woolly mammoth femur weighs over 30 kilograms. The bone huts at Mesirich required the remains of at least 95 individual mammoths. Someone organized that. Someone decided where to build, what bones to use, how to arrange them, so the structure would not collapse under snow. That is project management. That is engineering at a scale that required planning horizons we rarely attribute to people this ancient. And then there was food. Because winter does not just freeze you, it starves you. This is perhaps the least understood dimension of Ice Age survival. Modern humans shiver and reach for the refrigerator. Your ancestors had to anticipate the absence of food before it happened, and solve that problem in advance. With no writing, no calendar, and no guarantee of next year's spring, the solution was layered and systematic. Archaeological evidence points to a practice researchers call fat caching, stockpiling animal fat as a dense caloric reserve in the weeks and months before the coldest season. Fat carries more than twice the caloric energy per gram of either protein or carbohydrate. Your ancestors seem to have known this, not in any articulated biochemical sense, but in a deeply learned, experientially understood way. They hunted large mammals in autumn specifically for their fat content. They rendered that fat over fire, stored it in animal bladders and stomachs sealed with sinew, and buried those caches in permafrost that functioned as a natural freezer. Anthropologist E. Richard Sorensen, studying modern hunter-gatherer groups that still live in extreme cold, has noted that the knowledge systems involved in winter food preparation are extraordinarily complex, passed down through generations with the precision of an oral manual. Your ancestors were doing the same thing. The knowledge of when to hunt, what to target, how to process, how to store, and how to ration was not instinct. It was culture, and culture is what kept them alive. There is another dimension that researchers are only now beginning to fully appreciate: the role of sleep, or rather, the alteration of it. Several recent studies, including work published by Jerome Siegel of UCLA's Semel Institute, suggest that traditional hunter-gatherer populations in extreme climates naturally adjust their sleep architecture in response to cold seasons. They sleep longer, they wake during the night, not anxiously but with purpose, to tend fire, to share warmth through physical proximity, and then they return to sleep. Multiple sleep cycles with brief waking intervals in between. This is not insomnia. It is an adaptive behavioral rhythm that managed heat loss across the night by spacing fire tending into the natural breaks between sleep stages. In other words, your ancestors were not sleeping through the cold. They were managing it in shifts. Together, that word keeps returning. Together, because perhaps the single most powerful cold-weather survival technology ancient humans possessed was not fire, not clothing, not bone huts or fat caches. It was social density. Studies of thermoregulation in cold-adapted mammals consistently point to huddling as a primary heat conservation mechanism. Your ancestors almost certainly did the same, sleeping in close physical contact. arranging bodies in configurations that minimized exposed surface area. But they went further than any other mammal. They organized that contact intentionally. They made decisions about who slept where, how groups were arranged, and how resources like warmth were shared across the social unit. This is not behavior that requires language in any complex formal sense, but it does require something that looks a great deal like care. Think about that word for a moment. Care. Not in the soft modern sense, in the literal survival level sense. The decision to share your body heat with another person in conditions where resources are scarce is a choice. It carries a cost, and your ancestors made it, over and over, for thousands of years, until the capacity for that choice was woven so deeply into human social architecture that it became invisible to us. You see its ghost everywhere. You invite people into your home when it is cold. You feel instinctively uncomfortable when someone is shivering nearby. You are drawn to fire, to candles, to the particular comfort of a lit room in winter darkness. These are not aesthetic preferences. They are survival reflexes, tens of thousands of years old, still running in the background of your nervous system without your permission. Tonight, when the temperature drops outside and you reach for your thermostat, you are doing something ancient, not the button pressing, the responding, the feeling of cold as a signal that demands a social and bodily response. That signal has been running in your ancestors since before the word cold existed in any language spoken by any human alive. The winter came for them. They did not hide from it. They read it. They answered it. Together, and somehow, impossibly, it was not enough to destroy them. It was enough to make them more human than they had been before.